The most dangerous version of you isn't the one who is angry, or the one trying to prove something. It's the version that stops asking for permission to exist in the space you've already earned. For most people watching this, that version hasn't disappeared. It's been managed, not hidden, not abandoned, managed, the way you manage anything that becomes inconvenient to the life you've carefully constructed around it. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be less formidable. You became responsible. You became the person everyone could count on to keep the rhythm, absorb the friction, maintain the structure. And somewhere inside that process, gradually, without a clear moment you can name, ambition stopped being the primary driver. It was replaced by something more respectable. Stability, reliability, the long game. And the shift from builder to maintainer didn't feel like loss at the time. It felt like maturity. But there is a quiet erosion that happens when stability becomes your primary strategy. You begin to mistake your habit of being careful for a decline in your actual capability. You start weighing the reputation risk of every bold move. You calculate the cost of disruption. You think about the mortgage, the relationships, the professional standing it took 2 decades to construct. Slowly, the formidable version of you gets placed in storage to protect the reliable version. That wasn't a mistake. It was a strategic adaptation. It kept things intact during the years when keeping things intact was the most important job. But the danger now is that you've lived in that defensive crouch for so long, or you've forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Here's what quietly happens after 40. The environments most people operate in, professionally, socially, institutionally, don't actually reward the sharpest version of you. They reward the most manageable version, measured speech over direct speech, consensus over conviction, diplomacy over positioning, and most capable people internalize that signal without realizing it. 2 lines, if you were to chart them. Responsibility climbing steadily across your career, assertiveness plateauing, then dipping, not from weakness, but from recalibration toward what the system was actually incentivizing. Confidence doesn't disappear after 40. It reallocates. It gets redirected toward maintaining what already exists, rather than expanding what's possible. When there's a specific kind of pain that comes with being respected, but no longer truly influential. People seek your input because of your experience, but the decisions get made without you. You are treated as a pillar, stable, immovable, and unfortunately, easy to route around. You became the quiet, competent one, highly capable, rarely self-promoting, historically reliable, increasingly aware that competence alone stopped commanding influence somewhere along the way. The younger generation moves with an energy advantage you no longer feel like competing with. And while you carry pattern recognition they haven't had time to develop, you find yourself hesitating before speaking, calculating before acting, softening before landing. The fatigue you feel isn't just from work. It's from the constant effort of self-censorship. Here's what most midlife content gets wrong. It frames the problem as motivation, as if what's missing is enthusiasm, as if the right speech, the right weekend, the right moment of inspiration could restore what's been quietly reassigned. But you don't need a speech. What you need is an accurate diagnosis. The version of you that feels constrained right now isn't underperforming. It's over-adapted, adapted to institutions that rewarded your silence over your agency, adapted to relationships that required your predictability, adapted to a self-image built around being the one who holds everything steady. Confidence doesn't decline with age. Incentives change behavior, and the incentive, for a long time, has been to stay inside the frame. What accumulated experience actually creates and why it's so rarely deployed fully, is worth examining directly. After 2 or 3 decades of real complexity, you develop a kind of processing capacity that isn't available to someone at 28. You read a room before anyone has spoken. You identify the actual constraint in a situation while others are still debating the surface problem. You understand consequences structurally, not theoretically, because you've lived through enough of them to know how they unfold. That's not nostalgia. That's pattern recognition, political awareness, emotional regulation under pressure, not because you were taught it, but because you earned it through repeated exposure to situations that didn't have clean outcomes. Younger energy doesn't replace that. It just moves faster. And speed, at a certain point, is not the same as authority. Now, and this matters, none of this removes the complexity you're actually living with. There are real constraints here. People depending on you. A reputation built over years that you have no interest in dismantling for the sake of a philosophy. Financial responsibilities that aren't abstract. There's also fatigue, the kind you don't sleep off. The kind that accumulates from decades of navigating systems that required more performance than was probably necessary. Reclaiming authority doesn't mean ignoring those things. It doesn't mean recklessness. It doesn't mean dramatic reinvention. It doesn't mean becoming unrecognizable to the people who have relied on your steadiness. It means something quieter and more precise than that. It means deciding which parts of your careful persona are still genuinely serving you, and which parts are simply habits of fear that outlived their purpose. Reputation risk. People may be surprised by your assertiveness. Let them be. Surprise means you are no longer predictable in the way that makes you easy to overlook. Financial reality. You don't have to risk your livelihood to reclaim your agency. You just have to stop letting your livelihood dictate the full range of your identity. The most powerful shift available at this stage of life isn't a change in behavior. It's a change in permission structure. For most of your adult life, you've been operating inside frameworks that required you to earn the right to act, earn trust, earn credibility, earn the room's confidence before making a move. That wasn't irrational. It was appropriate at earlier stages. But at a certain point, continued deference stops being humility. It becomes habit. Real authority after midlife doesn't come from being louder. It doesn't come from reinvention for its own sake. It comes from the moment you realize you no longer need the system to confirm what you already know before you act on it. True authority is self-issued. That shift feels dangerous, not to others, but to the constraints you've been maintaining. When you stop being the person who always softens the position, who always absorbs the friction, who always keeps the peace, you disrupt the expectations of everyone around you. You become unpredictable again. And unpredictability is the foundation of influence. The second half of a capable life doesn't look like reinvention. It doesn't require performance. It doesn't demand that you become someone your past self wouldn't recognize. What it looks like, when it works, is a gradual withdrawal from the approval structures that were never actually required, the slow removal of filters that outlived their purpose, the decision to act from what you know, rather than from what others expect you to know. Authority grows where approval stops, not because approval is worthless, but because continuing to seek it past a certain point is the very thing holding the ceiling in place. The careful version of you did its job. It kept things intact. It protected what mattered during the years when protection was the primary task. But it cannot take you into the next phase. Because the next phase doesn't require protection. It requires presence. The version of you that feels constrained right now isn't waiting for conditions to improve, or for the right moment to arrive, or for someone to finally recognize what you bring. It's waiting for you to stop managing it. That may be the most significant internal move available to you at this stage of life. Not because time is running out, but because enough time has passed that you no longer need to earn what you already carry. The question now is simply whether you'll let that be enough.